So good morning to all of you. Aging is being rediscovered in our culture right around us. It's become a valid discipline of exploration. And one of the books that I have found very helpful is a new book. It's already won 2 book prizes, and it's by Connie Zweig, and it's entitled The Inner Work of Age. And I want you to know about it. It's just a very helpful book as a guide, and it's also been the basis of more than one conference on aging in the United States. I'm going to present part of a longer essay, and so just to situate it for you, and I'm looking at the clock so I can watch my time. Right before where I'm going to begin, a psychologist was asking, in our elderhood, do we need newer patterns of adaptation? Maybe the old ones are outworn. Maybe their shelf life has expired. So within that, I'm going to begin. And this is slide 8 because I don't have the time to present all of it, but I've taken out a piece that I think fits the title of the mythology of aging. And so I'm questioning my own patterns of adaptation in order to see if I need to let some of them go and yield to newer ones. It is even more necessary to recognize maladaptive terrains within me, as well as how I may live them out in the world that require modification on a journey whose only constant is flux. What do I find myself resisting, refusing, or even deflecting on a journey, and to excavate what those motives are? For a myth that I might naively consider functionally quite sufficient may in fact be dysfunctional, perhaps because it has a more involved and complex story to integrate into the larger narrative that shapes my identity. Calcification is the arena where I feel like I may be losing a give and take with the world. My personal myth may require some ample amounts of vinegar run through it to loosen up calcium deposits in order to reclaim some of its previous flow and encourage greater pliability. Now, I hope from the above, we can understand how being pulled down is an opportunity for deepening in all areas of our becoming. Both my wife, Sandy, and I continue to converse about our own aging. We sense the rich paradox of losses and gains that we can name. And we're learning to respect our own declines, especially hers in this moment, or in her own aging after surviving 2 strokes that came close to killing her, challenges her imagination and her memory with words that want to hide in the crevices of her mind. I want to tell you all at the outset that she is one of the most courageous human beings I've ever met. Becoming conscious of aging is to enter a new tribe of trials that limit and freedom to expand what we feel called to do. I'm glad that Jan mentioned Joseph Campbell already because I want to bring him in here. Campbell plays with the image of aging in a wonderful way. Here's what he writes. In old age, your only relationship to the world is your begging bowl, which in our culture is your bank account. That's what you've already earned, and it has to support this relatively carefree last stage of life. I can tell you, he goes on, that it is the best part of life. It's a period when everything is coming up and flowering. It's very, very sweet. It's a blooming. Now, the above speaks to and consciously directs moments of greater awareness that feels new to me. An important segment of this awareness is, as Campbell puts it eloquently, as he relates meeting and conversing with the German philosopher Karl Friedrich Durkheim, who told Campbell that you live the myth, that you live the divine life within you, yourself as a vehicle, not as the final term, but as a vehicle of consciousness and life itself. By becoming, in Durkheim's words, which then Campbell makes famous in his own writings, transparent to transcendence. This, I see as my journey continues, is the core of mythological consciousness. This transparency is so conducive to my growing interest in the mystery of the aging journey. As I sense the soul bending more toward the transcendent, as it deepens into the immanent mystery of everyday life, all within a body that has its own agenda for declining. Aging allows a more accepting presence to what Connie Zweig, whose book I just showed you, believes, that we can attune to our own inner guidance, remembering that we are not the doer, we are a soul in service. Let me stay with this sense of a growing awareness for just another moment. I ask myself now, what is it I am becoming more aware or more conscious of? My ability to articulate them is to ask, what are my inflection points? What are my inspiration points? And thirdly, what are my infraction points, where I'm willing to risk stepping out of the ordinary, where I can tolerate and at times even relish where my conventional boundaries of thought dissolve? Now, these are a few of the essential questions that drive the energies of my quest in aging. I also sense they are openings into a deepening sense of elderhood, where knowledge moves from understanding and insights into what I call the fertile loam of wisdom. Now, wisdom is a word that moves between being a verb and a noun. And remember when you learned in elementary school that slippery part of speech, the gerund. So perhaps wisdom is a verbal noun. It's an action and it's a state of being. Wisdom bends towards the application in a measured or balanced way of what has been learned, sensed, and imagined to my life in relation to others and the generosity to share it. The imagination is often the most powerful way into service of grace to grace relations to others, joined to the mythic knowledge gained from a life of self-reflection and self-application in the spirit of service. Perhaps then, the aging journey over time reveals an equilibrium between looking back and looking ahead. Each has its own brand and intensity of energy and angles of reception. So much of the aging hero's journey involves a recollection, a reverse motion of life itself. And that has brought me to this question. Is my life now, the greater part of it, already lived so that I can discern many of the deeper patterns that framed it and the larger story that nourished it? The aging hero's journey insists on a spiraling back to reclaim shards that had been lost or cast aside, but now, sorry, but now, at the same time, the journey is in the form of a questioning. What has been sacrificed or let go of? What's been dismissed or forgotten in the interest of the larger narrative working its way to the surface of both time and space? I think it has value in being able to name them. But here is a good place to note what Campbell says at the end of the hero's journey. Quote, I was reading in one of the Sanskrit texts recently, because in your old age, my dear friends, in your free time, you go back to what fed you most in your youth and childhood. Then he goes on to mention that even though he read this book before, it struck him now in new and novel ways. This spiralic motion can be applied to so many venues of our aging life when we revisit where we once were and discover there new perspectives, understandings, and new relations. I find that the imaginative realm continues to grow richer, more complex, and textured with age. I believe that I can think and reflect better now, in part because I have fewer encumbrances and worries about critical voices trying to detain my progress. In addition, there is a joy in seeing one's own children in their children, and it is as mysterious as it is miraculously delightful. In this stance or life position is a mythic moment where one's life structure communes with both remembrance and anticipation. Perhaps in equal measure, it encourages a fuller sense of belonging to and with the world as it is, and less how I demand it to be. My task as an elder is to extend this very pattern out as far as I dare. I awake much more often each morning with the presence of mortal awareness, a term that Connie uses in her book. But I also realize that I scurry from it less now than originally. It carries with it a certain melancholy, even an inevitability, and an acute value for the day. Within its emotional blanket, I feel casually urgent. As its awareness grows, I think of creative ways to accept it, to befriend it as part of the overarching myth that must be integrated into the journey. And in so doing, slowly to be sure, it pushes a question like a young plant to the surface. What have you given your life to? And is it still of such worth that I want to continue to feed that way of being and doing? Does it continue to allow me to gain joy and a sense of purpose from it? So these are really fundamental questions I'm asking myself, and I'm sharing them with you for your consideration. Thus far, the answers have been largely in the affirmative. It also pushes me to question when I might retire and even what value, if any, that word carries. Thanksgiving draws me into an interdependence with all things, all people, even those who seem dedicated to be adversaries. Learning to accept them on their terms is another way Thanksgiving serves me in the aging journey. Campbell speaks of the crucifixion, wherein he believed that Christ did not think the Godhead to be hung on to, but let go of. And he came into the world to participate in its sorrows. This is the act of joyful participation in the sorrows of the world, Campbell believed up until his death. Do you see what I mean? He asks. You get a point of view. You get, what can we call it? A non-egoistic, non-judgmental point of view. And you go into the play and you play a part. Coupled with gratitude as a secondary impulse, the ability to sift through each day with a more discerning sieve and to gauge what to hold back and what to drop through the tiny gaps in that screen. Some days that sieve must be woven more tightly, and in others, with a bit more generous spacing. But time is not only passing, but accelerating in an aging life. It's how I feel it, and I don't think I'm alone. T.S. Eliot's J. Alfred Prufrock seems so unconcerned with time. Of course, so he's a young man. His refrain in the poem is, "For indeed there will be time, and indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare? And do I dare?" These lines from Eliot's masterpiece of a lonely hero compels this aging elder to pause, not so much to revise, but to become more aware of what has been invisible in life and to allow it a more refined visibility. Elderhood invites and even requires, as I'm thinking about it, another register of imagination, one that is more attuned to the spiritual and imaginal life of the soul. Campbell tells us in The Hero's Journey that, quote, you live the myth, you live the divine life within you, yourself as a vehicle. And to which I add, most especially in aging, you learn from the metaphors and analogies of others, while at the same time contributing your own analogies to the story of your life. Now, one might continue to construct new forms of expression from what has come into the imagination. What kind of imagination wakes up an elder? Some initial notions include an imagination that reflects on the past and sees in the convex mirror of history the images birthing into the future. An elder is perhaps a version of a special edition of a sage, one who has learned to reflect in depth on what capacities in the past and currently provide the inklings for glimpses into the future. Now, to come into a more contemporary classic, the elder in Toni Morrison's award-winning novel, Beloved, is the old wise sage Baby Suggs, holy. She who carries the shame, the pain, and the suffering of her people, but who promises them hope in the clearing as 90 of them gather to hear her speak. As an elder, She carries the collective soul of her people and liberates it from their suffocating confines of being enslaved. Their enslavement is both physical and psychological, in part a self-image that she breaks into and shatters. Listen to her exhortation in the clearing of the woods. Here she said, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it. Love your hands. Love them. Raise them up and kiss them. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and to dance. Backs that need support. And all your inside parts, you got to love them. The dark, dark liver, love it. Love it. And the beat and beating heart, love that too. And so I'll end here with just one reflection from my former creative writing teacher at Kent State, who left the institution and studied and became a Unitarian Universalist minister. And Barbara's maybe in her mid 80s, and I don't think she would yell at me for saying it. She makes a distinction between an elder and an aged person. Elders, she says, are different, even though the very same people are seniors. In fact, the very word elder just about comes with the prefix wise. An elder is either up to speed as anybody else about technology, or is someone who lives in a world where technology can have no sway because the elder has more important things on the mind than mute buttons and chat boxes. And I'm going to come over. The elder lives in a world where ideas matter more than things. An elder is the one to go to for help with things that matter, like what you do with your life or how to manage with the deck life has already dealt you. Elders get honors and deserves them. People emulate elders, hope to do as well when they become elders themselves. When somebody calls me an elder, Barbara told me, I stand up a little straighter and make ready for the gifts that are sure to follow. So I end you with that image of an elder and not a senior, because I think cultivating the elder in each one of us is a worthy enterprise.